Welcome to the Talent Culture Podcast. Learn how the most innovative companies implement culture and make it part of their strategy. On the Talent Culture Podcast, we're interviewing business professionals on how they prioritize onboarding and culture, bringing our own expertise and experience from working with dozens of companies on exactly this. The Talent Culture Podcast is an actionable strategy guide that can either help you implement these strategies in your company or learn how you get buy-in from executives. Your host is Thomas Bundgaard, CEO at Empact. Enjoy.
Thomas, welcome to our Culture Podcast. Could you maybe explain the company you're working for and your role there?
Happy to do so. And first of all, a warm thank you for inviting me in. My name is Thomas Bundgaard, and I'm the head of HR in Denmark and assigned countries to Denmark, primarily Northern Europe. I think right now I'm having a role where I'm supporting approximately 6,500 employees in Siemens Gamesa renewable energy. And as the company name is stating here, then of course we are within renewable, meaning that we are producing and installing wind turbines globally as a company. So these are those very clever things you're seeing each time you drive on the highway, producing electricity for a lot of the world population. So that's, let's say, our main product and activities. Of course, we without additionally to the whole, let's say, production and R&D part of wind turbines. Then, of course, we also have a very large service business, meaning that each time we install a turbine, we would also like to enter into agreement with our customers that we do all service maintenance on all the turbines for up to 20 years lifelong. So that's also a very important part of our business.
Okay. So when you said it's around 6,000 people, what are you actually doing, when it comes to employee engagement towards those 6,000 people?
I would say the 6,000 people is actually only the ones I have the pleasure of supporting in my day-to-day job. As a company, we are approximately 25,000 employees globally in the company Siemens Gamesa. So it's actually what we call the NEMA region, North Europe, Middle East, I'm supporting. But again, most of the activities we are trying to do when we talk about engagement, then it's of course with the aim to support and make sure that we are supporting all our employees globally at the same level. So it's not just specifically around the 6,000 employees as such.
So you do the same thing across the world?
That's the aim, yes. But I would actually say, because again, we need to be honest to ourselves, it's very difficult for us to actually also do it on a global level. Because again, in my opinion, and based on my experience being, let's say, more than 20 years working professionally with HR, then of course you always need to take, let's say, regional or national aspect into account as well. So there is, of course, a huge difference if we look at what is actually the specific need on Region North compared to what, let's say, an Asian or US American employee is expecting from a company.
Could you maybe elaborate on that, maybe with some examples, where the differences are?
Yeah, but again, let's say in terms of working culture and also in terms sometimes of our mindset, what's right and wrong, that's I at least have experienced some differences. And that's not the same as saying that something is better or worse off. I think it's simply the task of HR normally to go in and harvest, so to say, the advantages that each region has to offer. And again, I think also in these times where diversity inclusion is a very hot topic and also important for us as a company, that then of course it becomes really also an important topic for HR professionals to investigate and harvest some of these, let's say, differences that there is. So again, it's not about right and wrong here. It's simply just understanding it and then also, let's say, taking advantage on what needs to be done, because there are for sure differences.
Okay, yeah. Especially I can imagine on the diversity part.
Yeah.
Do you have any concrete goals there? It's how you actually deal with diversity, because normally the discussions are typically just women, but there's a lot more to it. So how are you actually dealing with it at your place?
Again, I think it's also linked up to maturity. We as a global company is also have set, let's say, some quite stretched and ambitious targets, and they are also very most linked up to, let's say, this gender diversity topic, because that for me is also a very smart and natural starting point.
Yeah.
But I think the tricky part is also to find out that diversity is so much more, and of course, depending on the maturity level of the branch you are in or the company you are part of, then of course you need to start somewhere. And I would say globally, it's of course okay to say, okay, we need to have, let's say, a certain ratio number, men versus female in managerial positions. That's normally how you see it. But again, as soon as you start deep diving into just what can seem quite obvious and simple, that maybe there needs to be a 50-50, 40-60 split, whatever is possible, then it also becomes, let's say, a question, can we not expand this definition much more? Because again, how come it's just within managerial positions? Because for us as a company, we are also evaluating the need for specialists, PMs, and other competencies is as equally important as just being a manager, as one example.
Yeah.
And the funny part is also when we start up these discussions, because we as a company has done quite a lot trying to, of course, expand the understanding, what is diversity, how can it actually be embedded in daily life. Then also when we embark upon this discussion and dialogue with our employees, we also foresee that sometimes, let's say, some part of our employee population is getting agitated a little bit about this gender diversity talk only. Because again, if you are a female candidate that would like to apply for a managerial position, I sometimes question mark, what is the reason that you have then been selected and handpicked for that job? Is it due to your gender? Is it because you're the best to do at your job? And I think it's the last part that people normally would like to be selected for, and which is also the one where female candidates in this example are coming back with that kind of a feedback. Yeah. So it is a balance, but I think the important part for me is that when you set these kind of stretch goals, then it's also, let's say, a token of appreciation, and also something where when you deal with integrity in your leadership style, where you need to act upon it and do something about it. Otherwise, it's just a number in a book.
The difference between, can you maybe, are some areas, significant areas where you perform better in the diversity, or is that cultural specific, or are we easier doing it in the northern areas or the American areas, or how do you see that?
It all depends. I think I had a very interesting example, because it's actually only 1 month ago I discussed it with my peer in the UK that is having, let's say, much more rigid legislation, meaning that they need actually to fulfill and uphold certain ratio numbers. And again, we are in a business where we also do the installation of wind turbines. And you can imagine when we are talking about sites in the offshore sea area, then it's also a very tough environment. And I can tell you, if you then have a ratio where you need to say, maybe as in the UK, I imagine it's around 50-50 or maybe 40% female needs to be within a certain position, and you take an installation lead or installation technician, that's very hard to go out and fulfill that ratio, finding 40% women, because again, just finding those female candidates having an interest, that's one challenge. But the second part is also when you're then out in rough sea and you need also to secure that, let's say, the prerequisites or the working environment, it also supporting, let's say, the different needs of all genders, then it becomes really tough about something that can sound on a desk work or as an ambition quite, let's say, straight on and easy to fulfill. Coming back also to the question around, is it, are there some areas where that we are better? I would say no, because again, I think it's linked a lot to mindset. And the ones actually working best with gender diversity and diversity as such is where you have not built in these kind of bias, or you have at least also undertaken some trainings in order to actually make sure that you are also putting this mirror in front of yourself and saying, okay, it can be that the way I act can actually be interpreted in a certain way, and you maybe also need to, as a manager or leader, to be open to a certain degree of feedback, because again, maybe you're not aware that your dealings in your everyday life is imposing, let's say, bias, or you are selecting some over others, so to say.
So you have done a lot of leadership training in that area, or?
So we as a company, also because we are newly merged company between, let's say, two old legacy companies, which was Siemens Wind Power and a Spanish wind turbine manufacturer called Gamesa, that then there were a strong need also to do a lot of leadership training and trying to set, let's say, a new working culture, a company culture. And as part of that, then the diversity inclusion topic was also a topic of interest for the senior management, to make sure that we are, of course, not bringing in legacies, but there's also a lot of new blood coming into the company, newcomers. And when we mix all that up, then for sure we need to find the right balance, because otherwise there is a risk that you are handpicking the few you know from your old days, and then again you do not challenge and set up a new culture, which is heavily needed in times, as in our example, where we needed to merge two companies.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it was natural for you to actually set a new standard when the two company merged.
It was,
more or less.
but I would still say, as a brand, that then still we are far behind where we actually should be. So that's also the reason why we need to continue pushing for this.
Yeah.
And I can also come up with another example, because we just executed a large reorganization effective here 1st of Jan. And again, also when you then go out and then you are trying to select and set up, let's say, new ways of organizing, then in the end, after you have set up the organizational principles, then of course you also need to nominate candidates to fulfill certain roles. And again, of course, you look at the people you already have, the existing population, but also when you then see that maybe it's not fitting, let's say, the needs of the future in terms of right split, that then for sure it becomes a challenge, because what do you do a very short time in order to maybe find some other candidates with a diverse profile or whatever? So it's not an easy exercise. It's something, at least my experience says, that it takes time, but it also takes a lot of commitment, also from, let's say, upper management, middle management, and also lower management, simply to fulfill it. Otherwise, nothing happens, and then you continue with the same ratio numbers.
Yeah. But at least it's on the agenda, and you're working with it. That's the important part of it, and being ambitious. But I agree, as long as it doesn't become the number in itself, because then it's, as you said, why you're then employed, just because you're a woman or not. I totally agree.
That can be one question of argumentation, right? But sometimes maybe also, for me, diversity is so much more than just genders. Exactly. I think in terms of mindset, getting different profiles in. It's also the way you deal with, let's say, talent management and junior pipeline coming into the company. As simply also the culture where you dare to speak up, to get new ideas in or challenge the way of doing. So it's so much more, but I think the natural starting point for many companies is discussing, let's say, this split on genders. And that's for me, it's fully fine as a starting point. But I would, as an HR professional, like to move on quite fast. But of course, you also need to make sure that something happened in this, because otherwise you keep as is. And in some companies, maybe good enough. I can look at my own HR organization where I actually have, let's say, 50-50 in the split already. But I can also point at other parts of our businesses where it's maybe 90-10 in males representation, which for sure is not the aim we are striving for.
What about this reorganization? Did it also have a lot of layoffs, or was it just due to the recession, coming recession, or whatever, or was it just a strategic thing to do for the future?
I think which is also commonly known in the press is that, let's say, the wind industry as such is not performing its best at the moment. There are many reasons for this, and it's not unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how to actually phrase it, but as such, we as a company are not performing according to the expectations we have ourselves. Okay. Because if we are within renewable, then it's also stated that it's something a bit more long-lasting. So again, we also want to be in a business where we earn money and we are making profits, but again also that we are contributing to the green agenda and turnaround and energy transition as such. But if we look at our competitors as Vestas, GE, they are also loss-making companies at the moment. So something fundamentally is wrong within the industry, which have many reasons. And again, the pandemic, the final crisis, the breakout of war in Ukraine, unfortunately, is also affecting. But there is a lot of reason why, let's say, the industry is in this dire situation. But there are also many activities to get out of that situation. But it's not something you just do very shortly. It takes years, unfortunately. So coming back, when we then did the reorganization, is of course part of a change program we are doing to come back to profitable growth in the company. And part of this, then we also saw that there were a very strong need to reorganize or do things different in the company overall, also due to a reorg or merger of company that has maybe not lived up to the expectation we had 3 years ago. So a very fast and swift change was needed, and we are then having a new senior management established that has made this change program where we did this reorganization. But there are also announcements that we need to adjust, let's say, our working capacity in the company globally. So that is also a program we are undergoing right now as we speak.
How do actually, when those big change programs roll over the company, especially the big international ones, how do you handle then the fear that actually, or the uncertainty that arises among the employees, especially if you say you have to reduce the labor force with some percentage? How do you handle that? Because that's normally leads to some uncertainty and among the employees at least.
It does, and I think communication is key here. But I think it's also quite important that besides communication, that you act with high integrity in what you do. I think here speaking out as open and honestly as you can, because the workforce of today is not, let's say, stupid people or ignorant people. They know really what the situation is. Sometimes they actually even know better than, let's say, top management what is going on. So you need to be very careful, but also very swift in the way you communicate about these kind of changes, but also that you are, let's say, dealing with a purpose and provide meaning. Why? Also the why are you actually doing it? What is the need to actually act differently, and why do we need to change? And then also be a good translator in terms of trying to set, let's say, an overall global target down to something that has a meaning on a regional or maybe a national level. Because there are differences. You can be a sales company as such. We have sales representatives offices somewhere in the world, but in Denmark it's also still a manufacturing company. So again, me as HR representing Denmark in this case, then I also need to convey that message and make sure that, let's say, the operational level in production understand the rationale behind it and convey that message to the desk-led workers, so to say.
Okay.
So communication is one aspect, yeah.
Yeah. So and how do you communicate with them? Is it a town hall? Is it all the medias, or is it just is the preferred channels, or?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Let's say when we roll out company programs, then of course HR is heavily supported by a professional communication department and industrial relations because everything goes hand in hand. When we act, of course, we need to follow some formal process steps if we need to do redundancies or whatever, because again, the stock market will react to some of this and need that information first. But of course, then time is also of essence here, meaning that if we go externally, then for sure we need to do our homework before, meaning that when an announcement like this is set, then for sure, then we also know that 1 hour, half an hour later, then let's say the union needs to be informed at a certain level before, and then it breaks down. And then in the end, of course, there will be an email sent out to employees, but there will also be town hall, as you mentioned. It could be information screens. It could also be informal coffee sessions. So it follows, let's say, an overall program, and then you break it down. And then, of course, what we ask our line management is, of course, to support, let's say, this managerial message. And then they provided, let's say, with more, let's say, tools, Q&As, a lot of background information. So they can go out and act as ambassadors in the hallways afterwards and confront employees simply to take this potential concern out to best extent possible. It will always be there. But my firm belief is the more you communicate, and in these cases you can never over communicate, then that actually supports the whole anxiety, if that's the case. Okay. But the interesting part, and what I've seen, is also that has been a shift actually the last couple of years, because we had a quite attractive labor market in Denmark as one example. And again, then it was actually not, a sort of a threat or a risk, because again, people could actually quite easily go for new jobs in the market. Yeah. And that actually changes something, because I've been in the HR profession for some would actually say too many years, but I still like it. But again, my learning is, of course, that you need to take these kind of reaction into account. So even though, of course, it has been maybe an overheated labor market, then the situation right now is quite differently. And that also influenced the strategy you need to do as a company, because again, if we did a reorg, let's say 1 year ago, with a quite attractive labor market, then already now 1 year after, then let's say the labor conditions are quite different, with a potential national strike coming up, or at least there's a huge risk for it, and a lot of attention on that topic. Again, inflation and all that stuff we are hearing and seeing in our daily life, electricity prices, whatever. So again, the dynamics in the market is very, very fast changing, and that's, let's say, the whole role of communication HR to adapt to this, and making sure that you always, let's say, in my opinion, confront your employees with respect and openness to the best extent possible.
Yeah, so you do it differently. I spoke to another one, and they said there was more on the part on recruiting also to see that it's easier now to recruit than it was just 6-7 months ago.
Yeah,
there was overheated. It's a different market now. I totally agree.
It is, yes.
What about the whole role of HR? How do you see it? It's of course a huge part right now in the restructuring and everything. What else do you see? Where do you see the HR role grow maybe in the next coming 5 years at Siemens Gamesa? Do you see any difference there, or?
I do, but I think that the whole challenge and challenges for HR, so that is tenfold, I would say, because it goes from, let's say, digitalization, automation within HR services, in outsource discussion. What are the core services to be provided by HR as one thing. Then secondly, you can also discuss what is a role of a partner. How much, let's say, of the leadership managerial task can you actually also, in brackets, outsource to line management? And what is actually the core job of an HR professional or business partner.
Yeah.
Then of course we have all these discussion topics around, let's say, hybrid working, remote working, how to set up, let's say, the right priorities for also what you call deskless workers. I call them normally, let's say, we separate within old time fashion.
Blue collar white.
Blue collar white, which I really don't like that thermology. It's quite easy in a spreadsheet because when you look at numbers, right? But again, it's also it's actually in our case the blue collars that put butter on the bread, so they earn the money for us as a company. So they are indeed the most important population of employees. So I think it all depends. So we can deep dive into a lot of the topics, but I think the challenges for HR in the years to come, they are tenfold, and I think also a lot of services shown that.
What about this? You just mentioned briefly this hybrid thing.
Yeah.
Do you have any? I've spoken to many companies regarding this, and actually they have different, ways of dealing with it. One say you need to be in the office so many days. Some say you can decide, and what I experience is it's very different, and even some of also the big ones like you, they have, they may have only have 10, 15, 20, 30% workforce back. The rest is still scattered around the world. So do you have anything you're proactively doing, or what are your take on that one, or what are you doing?
Yeah, but that's also, as I said, it's really interesting because, again, I think it's actually also within one of the areas, at least in our company, also because we are still Spanish owned. So again, when I talked to my Spanish colleague a couple of years ago, it was almost, let's say, impossible for them to work from home, also due to infrastructure topics, all these kind of stuff. But again, for me, this has really been a dramatic change also for the better, because again, when I talk to my Spanish colleagues right now, they also, let's say, utilize the benefit of having a more hybrid or flexible work conditions. And when the pandemic then hit, then for sure everybody, especially the white collar workers or the ones sitting behind the desk, they needed, of course, to work somewhere else, where we still needed to have, let's say, the production or manufacturing sites up and running. So we needed to protect those sites, meaning that they need to plug in because they are producing, let's say, turbines or nacelles, whereas, let's say, the white collar population could go home and work from anywhere in the world, actually. Yeah. But what we also saw, and then that became actually a challenge for us as a company, were that again, when we needed to then make sure that we were transforming and merging our businesses together, then let's say this remote working actually took something away. So we also took a deliberate conscious decision in this company to say, actually, we need people to get back at the offices sooner. And then we set the rule to say, okay, you need to come in 3 days per week. Otherwise, it's fully fine with that high degree of flexibility, because that was something really employee valued. And again, we also hired in a lot of people working maybe in Sweden or south of Denmark or wherever in my case, or it could also be that somebody were employed in the US. And that, of course, gave some other, let's say, challenges in permanent establishment and taxation and stuff, which is also an important part to be aware of. Yeah. But this then asking people to come back where they were actually hired in the company with this high degree of flexibility was also a challenge. But what I really liked about it, and what I've found really valuable, today I'm here in the northern part of Denmark, is that again, the parking lot is full. So there is a lot of people, the canteen are full with really happy and smiling employees. And that's not because management have asked them to come back. That's simply because they actually miss it. They are seeing a true benefit in being and socializing together, teaming up. So for me, I think it's about finding that right balance. And then personally, if you ask me, for me, it's not that important if it's 2, 4, 5, 1 day. I think it takes this proximity together as management with your local team to say what works best and how do we secure productivity and we perform in the right way and deliver what we have promised. So again, it's a new tool, and I think in the Nordics, let's say, working from home is actually not a new tool, to be absolutely honest. It's been here for decades, right? But again, we need to respect that, let's say, in other working cultures, also coming back to the starting point in this talk, then for sure it's a completely different if you talk Asia Pacific, south of Europe, Brazil, whatever, compared to the Nordics. But right now, everybody, I think, it has become a global tool, I would say, and something that people really value, also as part of how you can retain people and attract people in the future. So you need to find that balance, and then you need to decide what makes sense in your own company.
Did you do some changes to your, especially during COVID? So you must have to both the onboarding and offboarding, everything.
Yes.
I can imagine, because that's at least something we have struggled with too. Certainly, how do you effectively onboard people when they're not in the office, or only hybrid, or there are any significant changes you have done?
It was because I think if you ask the employees that were onboarded during that time, I think they would say that could have been done better, to be absolutely honest, because we were learning as we went along. But for me, the bit funny story was that we made these drive-through. So like when you visit, the burger bars of this world and have a drive-through and order a meal or something, instead of getting a burger, you got a laptop and a telephone, and then we waved up again, right? With an instruction manual on how to log on. Luckily, of course, it was not a long period of time when we needed to do that. But again, we are trying to onboard, let's say, employees by almost, I would call them normal channels, meaning, of course, that after the interview, when you sign your contract, then material will be forwarded to you in terms of maybe some instructing videos about safety. It could also be, let's say, what product are we delivering and how do we do it? Where are the sites? Some core facts. And then it's actually up to line management based on also some instruction manuals to actually set this, let's say, onboarding program for employees. And again, there are huge differences if you need to join, let's say, the production team, because then there are safety trainings you need to adhere to, because we are dealing also with some quite treated products in the end. Otherwise, if you are white collar for sure, then it's also about coming and starting up. So that's quite normal. But I think we utilize a lot of different tricks and tips in the book, from instruction videos, team meetings and such. So I would not say that we are doing something very clever or smart in our company, at least. We can do more.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I only the last thing, it would be like, what's the biggest challenge you are facing right now, from your perspective? Not strategic point of view, but from the HR perspective, not from the whole renewable energy structure, but from your perspective.
From my perspective, I think it's, of course, as I always have, let's say, one aim with what I'm doing in my professional life is, of course, trying to create some value and some progress in whatever we do. And I think right now, as such, sometimes there is this huge risk that HR is being caught up by, let's say, its own development and its own, let's say, optimization initiative, that it forgets, let's say, how to be there and to be in the forefront about, let's say, the needs of the business. And if you are not balancing that one, because everything is actually needed, you need to gear up, you need to utilize the tricks in the book, so to say, with automatization, digitalization, self-service, all that stuff. But if you are caught up and not, let's say, also having, let's say, the customer perspective in all of this, that then you are actually caught behind the train. So that is one of my biggest challenges, to make sure that we can still look, let's say, our customers, the business in the eye, to say, what can we do for you and where do we see you should head, and challenge it in that journey. It's that fine balance. I think it's one of the biggest challenges right now within my field of expertise.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Thomas.
That was easy. Thank you.
This was the Talent Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.